The sky darkened, not because of night, but because of water. I heard a low hum beneath the earth, like a giant drum awakening. Then came the wind, carrying the scent of wet wood and resin not yet dry. A lonely vessel stood upon a silent sea, like a memory long buried. They called it Noah's Ark, but this story is not about wood, nails, or 40 nights of rain. It is about the memory of mankind erased, then rewritten. Have you ever wondered why almost every civilization speaks of the same flood? Why myths told on distant shores share the same rhythm of water? That is not coincidence. It is collective memory, buried and resurfaced, like a ship of stone resting upon the mountain. For decades, there were aerial photographs kept secret, sealed not because of what the ark was made of, but because of what it implied. If the ark was real, history itself would need to be rewritten. Enoch once stood among the gates of light and warned, "Turn back, or the water will do what fire could not, it will cleanse." But people laughed. They kept forging metal, charting the stars to predict fate, calling knowledge freedom, yet never noticing how pride flowed like a tide beneath their feet. When the waters rose, every sound merged into a single note, the note of judgment. That is where our story begins, but not where it ends. I am here to take you through 3 doors. The first door, what many believe is myth, is actually the missing piece of a greater truth. The second door, the texts cast aside, may hold the key to humanity's half-forgotten vault. The third door, if the ark truly existed, it did not just save men and beasts, it preserved the seed of memory so history could bloom again when the ground dried. Tonight, we will not preach. We will stand as witnesses, slow, solemn, awake. I will show you how ancient writings, images from the sky, and the stones of cold mountains align to form one voice. That voice says water does not only destroy, it chooses, it leaves marks, and when it retreats, what remains is what truly matters. Our journey begins far away in Africa, where a man once found an ancient manuscript inside a forgotten monastery. There, he met Enoch not in flesh, but in word. Enoch raised his hand and said, "Look, the gates, the chambers, the tablets, the lines describing heaven as a city." Then he lowered his voice and spoke of the watchers' beings who came bearing gifts but forgot their oath. Their gifts fell from their hands and turned to blades. The game began to slip. Giants walked the plains, and the earth trembled beneath their steps. The people cried out. Heaven was silent until it spoke through water. Yet heaven also spoke through wood, because there would be an ark. You may ask, is there proof, or is this only a story polished by time? I asked the same, until I saw the cold numbers, the black and white images, the signals rising from the ground. Then I understood. The mystery is not whether the ark existed, but who named it before the rain began, who placed the design in the mind of the builder, who told him to seal it inside and out, who taught him to measure with an ancient unit lost to time. We will explore these questions, but before we go, remember 3 symbols. Water is judgment and rebirth. Wood is memory that floats, and wind is the voice that calls at 3 a.m, waking those who can still hear. The waters have come, and the waters are gone. But what of us? We stand in another age, brighter screens, louder noise, yet the same heart waiting for an ancient call. Do not be afraid. Tonight we follow the trail from the mountain monastery to the desert scrolls, and higher still, to the cold eyes of the satellites above. We will listen to the voices of Scripture, of the earth, and of the wind. They will all speak one truth. The light was never lost, only forgotten. If you are ready, step through the first door. There we will meet a Scottish nobleman who sought the source of a river and found the source of a flood. From that moment, the old pages began to glow like embers, and when words ignite, secrets awaken. Noah will appear, but not as you remember. The ark will appear, but not where you expect. And the water, once thought to destroy, will return what humanity thought. It lost the faith in an order higher than the storm. I am not a judge, only a witness. I will tell you what I've seen and leave you to decide. Now open the gate, step through, And remember, if this story is true, it is not just history, it is an invitation for today, for you. Go now, for the drum beneath the earth has changed its rhythm, and the ark is waiting. Centuries before anyone had ever seen a satellite or traced a map, there was a Scotsman named James Bruce who left behind his wealth and comfort to search for the source of a river. People said he had gone mad, for no nobleman would abandon his estate to wander through the African wilderness. But Bruce said there was a calling within him, urging him to find the first flow of the Nile, the river Egyptians called the soul of the land. He didn't know that his journey to find water would lead him instead to an ancient book that had slept for thousands of years. After more than a decade crossing deserts and swamps, Bruce reached the highlands of Ethiopia. There, on a misty hill, stood an old monastery called Debre Libanos, its walls covered in moss, its doors carved from ebony cracked by time. In the deepest chamber of that monastery, he saw a dark yellow scroll written in a language he had never seen. It was neither Hebrew nor Latin. A priest told him, "This is the Bible, not a copy, but the true Bible." The language was Ge'ez, the ancient tongue of Ethiopian Jews. Within those thick parchment pages, Bruce found familiar stories, yet told differently. Not only Genesis and Exodus, but many other books he had never heard of, 81 in total. The Catholic Bible held 73, and the King James Version only 66. Bruce spent hours bent over the faded ink. He realized that the names mentioned only once or twice in his own Bible lived full lives in this one people, born, fallen, redeemed, and vanished into light. He began to understand that what had been removed was not excess, but depth. Then a name stopped him, Cold Enoch. In his Bible, Enoch was only a shadow, mentioned briefly and then gone. But here, before him, was a complete book, asterisk, the Book of Enoch, times 108 chapters, detailing a man who walked with light and wrote down what his eyes had seen in the heavens. Bruce realized that if this book were true, it would shake the foundation of European theology. For Enoch did not just speak of God, he described heaven not as a spiritual vision, but as a place one could visit, touch, hear, and return from. In his words, heaven was a luminous city, its walls sparkling like gems, its light moving like living beings. Bruce looked up and understood why the church had hidden these pages. He copied every line he could and brought them back to England, publishing his discovery in 1772. Scholars laughed. They called him a dreamer. Some dismissed the text as an Eastern heresy. The copies Bruce had carried home were locked away in libraries, unread, for almost 2 centuries. Then, one day, a shepherd boy in Qumran threw a stone into a cave and heard pottery shatter. Inside were nearly 1,000 scrolls. Among familiar texts like Isaiah and Genesis were 11 copies of Times, the Book of Enoch, Times Complete, identical to the Ethiopian version. The scholars were stunned. A text once dismissed as myth now appeared in more copies than many books of the accepted canon. From then on, a quiet question spread among theologians and historians alike. If Enoch truly recorded what he saw, and if these scrolls were that precise, what force had decided that humanity should forget them? In those lines, Enoch wrote that he was taken up not in spirit, but in flesh. He saw what was called heaven, not clouds and harps, but a vast structure filled with radiant gates. He described the movement of the stars, the structure of wind, the rhythm of the moon. His words reached beyond the science of his age. Reading them, you might feel a chill down your spine. How could a man who lived before Abraham describe orbits and celestial bodies with such clarity? The answer may lie in this. Enoch was not merely a writer, he was a guest. But Bruce's wonder did not end there. He asked himself, if heaven is a place one can enter, where is that path? Who opened the door for Enoch? And why did the gatekeepers never want us to know? Night fell upon the monastery. The wind slid through the stone corridors, carrying the scent of old leather and incense. Bruce later said that as he reached the final page, he heard a low vibration, like the trembling of water underground, as though a door beneath the earth was closing. He knew then that his search for the Nile had only been an excuse. What he had truly found was the source of another flood, the flood of knowledge damned for millennia. When Bruce left Ethiopia, He carried no gold, no relics, no jewels. Only 3 copies of Times, the Book of Enoch. Asterisk. He knew that someday the world would need to read it again, not to argue, but to remember that there are words written long ago, buried not to be lost, but to await the one meant to find them. And that is where this chapter closes, in the cold wind and the rustle of paper, because from these ancient lines, the story is about to unfold into something greater. A time when heaven would no longer be myth, but a map of reality. When the pages of Enoch's writings unfold, the reader is lifted to a realm no longer belonging to earth. He wrote that he was guided by an angel named Uriel through the layers of heaven. There was no darkness, only light that moved like living breath. Enoch did not speak of floating spirits or misty souls. He described a city with walls and gates and roads that shone like living metal. He saw many chambers, each with its own purpose, and every doorway carried a different name. He called them the 12 gates of light. At each gate stood radiant beings, so bright he could not look upon them. They moved in rhythm, as if operating an immense system that he could only partly comprehend. In his journal, Enoch wrote that these angels emitted light but had no solid form, that he could see through them as if they were made of pure energy. Perhaps this was his ancient way of describing projections, or a kind of living force that the eyes of his age had no words for. He saw a strange garden filled with trees that had no name, their fruit glowing like fire before dissolving into golden dust that sank into the soil. Uriel told him this was the storehouse of God, the vault of life itself. A modern scholar, reading this passage, once said that if written today, it would sound like a description of a genetic archive, a vast celestial biosphere. In the center of the city, Enoch saw a geometric object that pulsed with sound. He called it the Book of Life, saying every act and every word of humankind was recorded within it, a living archive, eternal, observing all. Some have suggested he described a form of divine intelligence, a record beyond time, or even a technology that transcends human understanding. But to Enoch, it was nothing but truth. He could only kneel and write down what was revealed. As Uriel led him farther, Enoch saw the skies moving like water, the stars drifting along invisible paths. He was taught that a year on earth is 364 days, and that the moon followed its own cycle, independent of the Sunday. These details, oddly precise, would not be rediscovered by astronomers for thousands of years. Enoch did not write as a mystic alone, but as a witness observing with the precision of a scientist. He described how wind was born from chambers of air, released by angels who commanded unseen currents. He looked down and saw the mountains and rivers below, the entire earth shining like a glowing sphere. He wrote that this place had a roof, which God called the firmament. Some modern readers believe this could have been Enoch's attempt to describe being inside something vast, perhaps a luminous vessel sailing through the cosmos. Some call it the physical heaven, others a divine craft, but Enoch knew only that he was there, and that it was real. When he reached the final chamber, Uriel stopped. Before him stood a great throne, cloaked in white light so intense that no form could be seen. Enoch bowed low and said that no human tongue could describe the face of the Creator. From within the brilliance came a voice, not sound, but presence. It told Enoch, "I will show you the layers of existence, past and future, so you may bear witness for mankind." And then Enoch saw. He saw empires rise and vanish, saw fire and water sweep the earth, saw angels fall and men learn the forbidden. He saw the shadow of a flood gathering across the horizon of time. He understood that his purpose was not merely to record, but to warn. When Uriel brought him back, Enoch was no longer the same. He knew that what was coming would be the greatest cleansing in the history of humankind. From that moment, the Book of Enoch ceased to be a record. It became a prophecy. Some scholars now say that Enoch had preserved the memories of a lost civilization, and that his descriptions of gates, chambers, and radiant technology were fragments of knowledge from that forgotten age. Perhaps he witnessed what modern minds would call ancient technology, or even an interdimensional order. But Enoch never tried to explain. He was not sent to understand. He was sent to see. That is the difference between those who believe and those who know. When you read his words, you may feel as if you stand on the threshold between two worlds, where knowledge and faith meet. Beyond the light, Enoch still stands, pen in hand, and the 12 gates of heaven remain open. I remember the moment when the light withdrew and left me falling into a darkness soft as ash. There were no birds, no wind, only the echo of metal ringing from afar. As my eyes adjusted, I saw shapes towering higher than the walls of cities, their shoulders brushing the clouds, their skin glowing like molten bronze. They were not men. They were the Watchers. They came in light and brought knowledge. They taught humans how to plant and harvest, to shape clay into vessels, to mix herbs for healing, to read the stars, to know the seasons. At first we called them gifts. Everything they touched turned radiant. They gave us fire and taught us to forge iron, bronze, and gold. They said that fire was the breath of heaven, and iron the voice of the earth. I saw the first craftsmen hold their hammers with trembling hands, each strike ringing like a hymn. But within that fire I saw another spark, the seed of pride. Once man learned to cast weapons, he began to think he could decide life and death in God's place. The Watchers, who were meant only to observe, lingered too long among us. They fell in love with the daughters of men. They desired what was not theirs. I heard them swear beneath the moon that they would remain, that they would create a new race. When they spoke, the ground trembled, for their vow defied the command of heaven. They taught enchantments, alchemy, astrology. They told humans they could read the will of God through the constellations. They showed them how to mix metals into sharper weapons, how to brew poisons for victory. The light in their eyes turned into flame. I stood beneath the night and saw torches blazing across the valleys. Mankind rejoiced, believing itself strong, but the earth wept and the rivers turned thick and dark. I understood then. Knowledge without reverence becomes a blade. A child once asked me, "Why are we taught these things if they will destroy us?" I could not answer. Perhaps God allowed that light to fall, so that we might learn to tell the difference between power and wisdom. The Watchers began to act like gods. They built stone temples, carved their names on gates, demanded offerings. I saw men kneel not before the Creator, but before beings who had forgotten their purpose. From above, a sound came, deep and mournful, like wind passing through metal. It was the voice of heaven, no longer gentle like breath, but heavy as thunder. It called to me, saying, "Write this down, for the day of reckoning draws near." I looked around and saw that the Watchers had turned into shadows. Their brilliance was gone. They hid in mountains and beneath rivers, trying to escape the wrath to come. Humanity, drunk on new knowledge, forged swords bright as suns and killed one another, claiming it was the will of heaven. I wrote with trembling hands. Each time my stylus touched the ground, I heard the faint ring of iron echoing through the hills, as if the metal itself knew it would soon be misused. I asked Uriel, "Why does God allow this?" Uriel replied, "Because freedom is the first test of love. Without the ability to betray, mankind would never learn the meaning of faithfulness." His words silenced me for a long time. I saw fire learning to speak in the language of iron, and I knew, when metal learns to speak, war begins to breathe. I saw other angels fall from the sky, stars extinguishing one by one in the night. Half of heaven dimmed, leaving behind a thin light like mist. I understood then that heaven had grown impatient, and when heaven grows impatient, water will speak. That night, I returned to my refuge and carved into stone a prayer for humanity. I did not dare ask for forgiveness, only for a chance to repair what was broken. The wind blew, carrying the scent of damp soil and metal. I knew the season of water was near. Before the waters rose, the ground trembled under the footsteps of those born from a forbidden union. They were taller than temple pillars, their shadows swallowing the Sunday. People call them Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers and the daughters of men. At first, they walked among us like kings. Their voices thundered, their eyes glowed like burning coals. They possessed knowledge beyond human reach. They could read thoughts, command beasts, bend stone with their hands. But their strength came without mercy. They were hungry, a hunger that no feast could satisfy. Each day they consumed more, and when the fields ran dry and the grain was gone, they slaughtered animals. When the herds were gone, they turned on men. The cry of human blood echoed from the plains to the high mountains. I saw children thrown into pits as offerings. Humanity trembled, yet some began to imitate. They said, if angels can kill, then so can we. The world became a banquet of shadows. Cities rose, their lights never fading, but within that brightness no one could tell good from evil. I walked among them and felt the breath of the earth growing weaker. The soil turned to ash, trees sprouted only to die, the rivers carried the taste of iron. I knew then the life of the world was being drained. Inside their stone temples, the Nephilim demanded gold, demanded sons and daughters as tribute. They claimed to be gods, intermediaries between heaven and earth. But when I looked into their eyes, I saw only fear. They knew heaven was watching. One day, the wind stopped. Uriel appeared within the mist, his face sorrowful, his light dim like a dying flame. He said, prepare yourself. You must go and tell them, turn back, or the waters will rise. So I went through cities, through great gates, through towers that glowed like suns, and I spoke the warning. They laughed. One giant hurled a stone at me and said, if heaven is angry, we will strike at heaven. When I spoke of mercy, they laughed again. When I spoke of sin, they raised their swords and said, sin is the right of the strong. I knew then my words were falling on hardened ground. Uriel looked at me and said nothing. Above us, the sky changed. The light flared and then went out, leaving a faint violet scar, like a wound across the heavens. From afar, I heard a deep rumbling, not thunder, but the gathering of water. I knew the decree had been given. But before the flood came, another event unfolded. I saw the fallen angels kneeling among ashes, their eyes dim, their faces streaked with tears. They begged for forgiveness, but the gates of heaven were closed. They who once carried light now bore only shadow. One by one, they were bound in chains and cast into a pit of darkness where no sound could live, where silence stretched longer than time. Heaven no longer spoke, only the earth, and I remained. Those still alive began to look at one another in fear. They heard a groaning in the deep, and could not tell whether it was the coming of water or the anger of God. I remember the eyes of a woman filled with a question she did not ask. Do we deserve this? I could not answer. I only knew this truth. When knowledge no longer leads toward light, it turns upon itself. And when that happens, the giants begin to eat darkness, for it is the only thing left to devour. I watched them one last time before turning toward the mountain, where a man was building a ship. The scent of pine resin drifted through the air, mingling with iron and ash. I knew then that judgment was near. That night I wrote it all down, so that no one would forget. They may not believe. They may call it myth. But these words are evidence. When you read them, remember this. Destruction does not come in a day. It begins the moment mankind forgets how to bow. When darkness covered the plains and blood reached the foot of the mountains, I was called once more. In the silence, I heard the wind twisting itself into the sound of words. Heaven asked, do you still wish to look upon mankind? I knelt, tears falling onto the dry ground, and I said, please forgive them, for they no longer know where the light is. But the heavens were silent. Then a voice rose soft as vapor, yet heavy as thunder. Enoch, it said, write this down, for it shall come to pass. I have seen corruption reach the deepest part of man's soul. They no longer know the difference between my word and the words of the watchers. They have turned my voice into a tool, and knowledge into a weapon. The earth has cried, the waters have wept, and now I will answer, I will cleanse. I will let all things begin again. I trembled. I knew this decree could not be changed, yet I begged still at least let one seed remain. Then I heard a name carried by the wind, Noah. He will be the remnant of life, the son of Lamech, the grandson of Methuselah, chosen because within him still lived the silence of faith. I understood then, heaven does not punish to destroy, but to heal. But to heal, the wound must be opened. Uriel told me to go and speak to Methuselah. I walked with steps heavy as stone. When I reached him, he sat before his small tent, the moonlight reflecting on a face that already knew. I told him everything. Methuselah was silent for a long while, then said, "If heaven has chosen, no one can refuse." But I asked, "Can Noah bear the weight alone? Can a man endure a rebirth that comes through pain?" Uriel answered, "Salvation is not for the many, but for those who can listen. And sometimes one listener is enough to begin again." From above, I saw heaven preparing. Clouds gathered thick as walls, the winds twisting upon themselves. The seas below drew back, as though taking breath. The earth cracked open, tremors ran across its skin. The loyal angels moved swiftly, carrying stones of light. They threw them into deep chasms, sealing the gates of the abyss. I heard them call the names of the watchers bound forever, each name echoing like distant thunder. Their shadows fell into the sea, and the waters boiled. I saw the great beings drowned, their screams rising not in pain, but in terror of being forgotten. I asked Uriel, "Will they be saved?" And he said, "Their light will be extinguished, but from their ashes humility will take root." I did not fully understand, but I wrote it down, for I knew the words carried heaven's will. When all was nearly finished, I saw the last angels bow their heads, their light fading, their forms dissolving into air. The sky grew silent once more. Only heaven and I remained. I asked, "When will the water come?" The voice replied, "When I no longer hear repentance." That night, I sat upon a mountain peak, listening to the wind whistle through the rocks. Below, humanity still danced around the fires, and the Nephilim still drank blood, singing their hymns of triumph. No one heard the warning anymore. I lowered my head, and within my chest I heard the sea. I knew it had begun. Far away, the first rain fell, each drop piercing the earth like an arrow. In that moment, I prayed, not for the world, but for one man, that at least one would hold the light. That was all I could do. I no longer had the power to change, only the duty to witness. I lifted my face to the black sky and whispered, "Lord, let mankind remember the way home." The waters were ready. The command was given. And from that instant, history turned to a blank page. That night, on land still dry, a child was born. And from the moment he opened his eyes, the tent of Lamech was filled with light like the coming of dawn. His skin was white as snow, his hair white as wool, and his eyes blazed like sunlight passing through water. When the child cried, it was not the sound of a human voice. It rang like the clash of metal. Lamech stepped back, his heart racing, for he knew that during his absence it was impossible for the child to have been conceived. His wife trembled, saying nothing, only holding the child as though grasping a piece of living light. In that moment, Lamech felt fear. He did not know whether he was looking at his son or a small angel wearing human form. He fled into the night, walking through the darkness to find his father Methuselah. When Methuselah saw his son's face, he understood at once what had happened. Lamech spoke, his voice shaking. "The child is not like us," he said. "His light fills the whole house as though it were burning." Methuselah was silent for a long time, then knelt and prayed. He called upon his own father, Enoch, the one who had been taken up into heaven to reveal the truth. The wind rose, dry leaves swirled around him, and Enoch's voice came through the night, deep and distant, as if echoing from within the water. "Tell your son that the child is truly his. Do not fear the light, for it is the sign of divine choosing. Name him Noah, for he shall bring comfort to mankind and rest to the earth." Methuselah passed on the words, and Lamech wept. He returned home and took the child in his arms, though still bewildered. The light of Noah softened, as if it understood the fear within his father's heart. From that day, rumors spread throughout the land of a child without a father, a being born from heaven. Some called him a sign, others a curse. But heaven had chosen, and none could undo it. As Noah grew, he was unlike any other in the village. His eyes always looked farther, as if seeing what others could not yet imagine. He could hear the voice of the wind and understood the language of water. He would sit by the river for hours, silent, his hand tracing the current as though listening to the whisper of the earth. One night, while all slept, he dreamed. A great door opened in the sky, and from it water poured down. Beneath the earth a voice told him, "Prepare yourself, for the world will be cleansed." At dawn he told his father, but Lamech could not believe. Methuselah, however, understood. He told Noah, "The dream is not illusion. One day there will be a true call, and when it comes you must obey, even if the whole world laughs." From then Noah began to prepare. He learned how to fell trees, to measure wood, to count the rhythm of the wind. People laughed, calling him a dreamer. But within Noah was something they could not see, a bright stillness. When he passed through the village, animals would follow him, as if bound by an unseen command. Some nights he looked up and saw the stars change color, and he knew time was short. In his dreams, Uriel appeared again, saying that a great flood was near, a torrent that would sweep all away, but that Noah and his family would be saved if they followed the instructions. Noah asked, "Can mankind still be forgiven?" Uriel said, "If they listen, but they have stopped listening." Noah bowed his head, tears falling, not from fear, but sorrow. He knew people would mock him as he built the ark, would throw stones and call him a fool. But he also knew that faith does not need a crowd. Lamech watched his son and saw in his eyes the light Enoch once spoke of, a light that does not burn, but reveals. Methuselah placed his hand upon Noah's head and said, "If heaven has chosen you, remain in silence, for noise is the language of the lost." On the night before the work began, Noah looked up at the sky and whispered, "Lord, if I am the last to hear your voice, grant me strength to obey until the end." The wind stilled. From afar came a soft thunder like a divine reply. He knew then that at sunrise the first hammer would strike, and every strike would be a prayer for a world about to drown. I still remember the first time I touched that tree. The wood was soft as flesh, and the scent of resin mingled with the breath of soil. The wind whispered to me, "Work quickly, for the rain has already set out from afar." I began to measure 300 cubits in length, 50 in width, 30 in height. Each number rang in my head like a chant, steady and repeating, the heartbeat of heaven itself. I did not know how I remembered those numbers, only that my hands moved of their own accord, as though I had built this vessel once before in another time. I called the craftsmen of the village. They came, laughed, and said, "The sky is clear. Where is your water?" I did not answer, for explanation only weakens faith. I kept building. Every strike of the hammer was a prayer. Every plank joined was a plea for mercy. The rain had not yet come, but I could already hear it, deep beneath the ground. Sometimes at night, I would wake and hear the wood expand. The wood lived, breathing with me. It creaked softly in the dark, like the whisper of souls waiting to be saved. People came to watch. They threw stones, they mocked. They asked me, "What is rain? What is flood? Who is this God that commands you to do such a thing?" I remained silent. One man struck the hull with his hammer and laughed, saying, "The wood does not answer." I looked at him, not in anger, but with sorrow, for I knew the sound would come, but not from the wood. It would come from their hearts when the water touched their chests. I worked for many years, my hair turning white. My father, Lamech, passed away before the ship was finished. Methuselah, frail and old, came to see me one last time. He said, "My son, remember this. Do not let your heart grow dry. The water will rise, but your heart must remain soft." Then he left, and I never saw him again. When the ark was complete, I stood before it in the valley. Its frame towered like the house of the wind. I sealed it inside and out with pitch. The sun fell upon its surface, and the tar shimmered like fire. In that moment, I felt the greatest loneliness ever known to man, to see what is coming and have no one believe. One evening, the sky changed. It was not the clouds, but the air itself. It grew heavy, thick, as if the heavens were bending low to touch the ground. I knew the hour had come. Then I heard a new sound, the rhythm of many feet. From the distance came herds of creatures walking 2 by 2. Birds flew in circles above, then landed in pairs. Cattle, deer, wolves, and lambs, all moving silently toward the ark. No one guided them, yet they knew the way. I opened the door, And they entered, calm and obedient, as though obeying a command older than creation. I looked at them, then lifted my eyes to the sky and whispered, "Thank you, for they still hear you." That night the wind rose. The clouds tore open like skin being split apart. Thunder roared endlessly, and lightning flashed over the valley like a sword of fire. I called my wife, my sons, and the few who still believed. We entered and closed the door. Outside the storm screamed. I heard the wood stretch, the first drops of water striking the hull. It did not sound like rain. It sounded as if someone were pouring an ocean upon the earth. I knelt, not in fear, but trembling. I thought of those outside, of the laughter I once heard. I prayed for them, though I knew it was too late. As the ark began to lift from the ground, I heard the wood bloom. The sound echoed like the heartbeat of the world. The wind howled through the cracks, carrying the scent of pitch, dampness, and life. I closed my eyes and remembered the words of Enoch. When the water comes, do not weep, for it is not the end. It is the ceremony of beginning. I opened my eyes and saw light flash through the narrow slit of the door. I knew then the sky had broken. The waters had returned to teach mankind the oldest lesson, that all knowledge without grace becomes storm. And I, the builder of the ark, was only a witness to one more rebirth by water. When the door closed, the world outside vanished. I no longer saw the sun, only heard the sound of water. At first it was a gentle tapping, like a warning whispered from above. Then came torrents, then oceans. The ark tilted, then rose like a leaf among waves. Each violent shudder was the earth itself crying out. Inside I heard the quickened heartbeats of men, the panting of beasts, the soft cries of children, all blending into the symphony of survival. I knew then we were no longer of the earth. The wind howled for 40 nights, and the waters climbed, swallowing everything. I dared not imagine what was happening beyond those walls. I could only pray. One night, I woke to the sound of something knocking against the hull. I knew no one could be out there, but part of me wanted to believe someone had survived. I placed my hand on the wood and whispered, "Forgive them, Lord." No answer came, only the pulse of waves against the vessel, like the breath of heaven itself. After 40 nights, the rain stopped, but the waters remained a world without edges. The ark drifted with no direction, carried only by the will of the current. Standing on the deck, I looked to the horizon and saw nothing but water and cloud, an endless mirror of gray. In that vast stillness, I felt the weight of smallness. All that had once been proud and loud was now silent. It was the silence of judgment. Months passed, and time dissolved. I no longer knew night from day. The light was dim and steady, like the faint glow of memory. Yet life continued inside the sounds of feeding animals, the quiet prayers of those who still hoped. Sometimes the wind would shift, and the ark would groan as if struggling to breathe. I feared we would sink, but each time, unseen hands steadied us. One morning I opened the small hatch above and released a raven. It flew away and did not return. I waited a few days, then released a dove. The first time it came back, perching on my arm, its eyes heavy with sorrow. I understood the earth was not yet ready. The second time, it returned carrying an olive branch. I smiled. No voice was needed. I knew heaven had softened. I bowed my head and whispered, "Thank you for remembering the small ones." Then the waters began to recede, slowly, like a wound closing after pain. The first mountain peaks appeared gray and quiet, like monuments of hope. The ark rested upon one of them, and I knew we had arrived. I did not know its name, only that the land beneath us had begun to breathe again. I opened the door. The dry wind rushed in, salty, cold, and alive. I knelt, pressed my forehead to the wood, and whispered, "We are still here." When I stepped out, the ground was soft but firm. The sky shone clear, and clouds hung like faint smoke after fire. All around me was the silence of beginning. The animals stepped out in pairs, trembling as they tasted the air. In their eyes I saw reflections of my own, fear, gratitude, and confusion before a world wiped clean. I built an altar of stone and laid my offering upon it. Smoke rose, curling upward into a pillar of light. I felt eyes upon me, not of judgment, but of mercy. When the smoke thinned, I heard the voice again. Noah, it said, the waters have completed what I commanded. Be fruitful, fill the earth. But remember, life was spared not for power, but to learn love. I stood in silence, my gaze on the damp soil, my heart heavy and light at once. I understood. We were not saved by merit, but by the compassion of one who had grown weary of destruction. I looked at my sons, at the sky, and there it was. The first rainbow arched across the air, its colors trembling like music. It was more than beauty. It was a covenant written in light. I knew then heaven had promised. But every promise carries a condition. Mankind must remember. I reached down and touched the ground. It was warm like the heartbeat of a world, just waking from its long, dreamless sleep. When the waters were finally gone, the ark lay still on the slope of a mountain, like a stranded whale. I looked at it. Its timbers darkened. The pitch hardened into a skin of stone. Time passed, yet its shape endured, a scar written into the body of history. Generations later, people would return to those mountains, each carrying a theory, a longing to touch something sacred. Some said it was Mount Ararat, the highest point of the ancient world. Others said it was only rock. But there were those who claimed to have seen it from the sky, a massive, ship-shaped form resting along the ridge, as long as an unfinished prayer. They called it the anomaly. Blurred black and white photographs taken by reconnaissance planes were locked away for decades. Some were later declassified, showing a faint rectangular shadow among the snow. Many believed it was the ark. Others said it was nature's trick. But I have always thought nature does not play tricks. It simply remembers what man forgets. In the region of Durupina, not far from Ararat, there is a ridge shaped like a ship. At sunset, when the light slants low, the edges gleam, sharp as buried wood. Measurements say it stretches 538 feet, and when translated into the ancient Egyptian cubit, it measures exactly 300 cubits, the length once written. Around it they found great round stones with holes at their tops, like anchors used to steady ships in heavy seas. They are so heavy no ancient hands could have carried them there for decoration. When the wind blows through those holes, it hums a deep tone like a prayer. They say it is the breath that remains from the great flood. Some claim to have found traces of iron embedded in the stone, like the marks of nails. Others say they have seen fragments of petrified wood. Yet every discovery meets its denial. Science does not favor miracles, and faith does not ask for proof. Between the two, the ark remains still waiting for someone quiet enough to hear it speak. Once a team came with ground-penetrating radar. Beneath the mountain, the image appeared repeated patterns, like the ribs of some great creature. They shouted in triumph, and then fell silent, for the data vanished. Some said the government seized it, others said the machines failed. Whatever the reason, the silence itself made people believe more deeply. Pilgrims began to come. They lit candles, placed their hands upon the stones, calling the place the Mountain of the Covenant. The old wept. Children played in the wind. Some said they heard the wood expand when the rain approached. I believe them, for sacred wood still remembers the water. Scholars argue that the formation is only collapsed sediment, shaped by erosion. Others reply that the metal traces and straight cuts cannot be natural. But regardless of who is right, the greater question remains: why does this image lie precisely where the scriptures said it would? Perhaps the evidence matters less than the message. The ark was never built merely to prove the story true. It was built to remind us that salvation is never late, only waiting for those who will listen. Each time the mountain snow melts, the outline of the hull emerges again, as if the promise has not yet finished speaking. Climbers say that when they reach the summit and press an ear to the ground, they hear the wind whisper like running water. Some say that when night falls, the air there changes cold, yet strangely gentle, as if someone still walks nearby. Perhaps it is imagination, or perhaps it is memory itself, echoing through the bones of the earth. I think the ark does not belong to time. It stands between two ages, one of arrogance and one of beginning. Every crack in its hull is a lesson, every grain of dust a question. And in every question the same voice resounds. Does mankind still remember? The wind from the mountain carries the scent of snow and stone, and I seem to hear the old waves, restless still. Those who journey there, whether they believe or not, descend changed with a quietness they did not bring, as if they too have stepped off the ark. And I understand then the true purpose, not to find the wood, but to rediscover gratitude. When the news of the ship upon the mountain began to spread, it was not only scientists or pilgrims who took notice, it was also those who guard secrets. For decades, the photographs taken from above were sealed in classified archives. They were said to belong to the Central Intelligence Agency, not because of religion, but because of location. The pictures were captured in the middle of the last century, when the Cold War still shadowed the earth. A reconnaissance plane flew over a mountain border, its lenses recording stretches of snow and rock. When the film was developed, there, in the gray expanse of the ridge, appeared a shape too perfect to be natural, a vast object, like a ship lying on its side. The report was filed, and then it vanished. Those who claimed to have seen it whispered that an order was given to bury the evidence. Some said the fear was that the public would begin to believe the Bible was real and that faith would become stronger than power. Others said the photograph captured something humanity was not ready to face. Whatever the reason, the images were locked away for nearly half a century. When they were finally declassified, the photos were faded and blurred, but clear enough to stir an old hunger. Could it truly be the Ark? Explorers returned to the mountains carrying radar, magnetometers, and infrared cameras. They announced results and were met again by silence. Their findings disappeared into the same shadowed drawers as before. This story makes me think of a man named Ron Wyatt. He was no scientist, only a nurse. Yet he said God led him to the ark. He filmed, measured, and proclaimed he had found nails, petrified wood, forged iron, even the remains of the altar Noah had built after the flood. Some wept when they heard him, others mocked. When experts examined the site, they found no proof. Some said he had forged evidence, others that he was blinded by belief. But I think in every seeker there is a trace of madness, and sometimes that madness brings us closest to truth. Whether Ron was right or wrong, he forced the world to ask a deeper question. If faith cannot be measured by instruments, who has the right to deny it? When the agencies remained silent, people began to tell stories in whispers. They said the photos did not only show the ship, but strange circular lights, as though metal beneath the snow was reflecting the Sunday. Some claimed that scientists discovered crystalline fragments in the rock materials not native to the region. Those reports, too, were recalled and sealed. It all felt familiar, because history repeats itself. When mankind touches something that challenges reason, its first instinct is to hide it, to protect its fragile image of what is real. The curtain of the agencies is no different from the curtain of the mind. It is drawn so that people can feel safe within their small circle of light, even when the greater light waits just beyond. Years later, when technology had advanced, new satellite photos were released. The same mountain range, the same ship-like form, but now anyone could see it with their own eyes. Still, even with clarity, the arguments did not end. The faithful said, "This is the final proof." The skeptics said, "This is coincidence." And heaven, as always, remained silent. I began to wonder if that silence itself was an answer, for if every mystery were solved, faith would die, and with it hope. Perhaps heaven wants the ark to remain hidden, so that each of us must build our own, from the timber of trust and the pitch of endurance. I looked at the old files, the torn newspapers, the whispered testimonies, and I understood none of these matter as much as what still stirs in the human heart, the quiet knowing that somewhere in this world there remains the mark of salvation. And if we have the courage to listen, we will hear it. When I close my eyes, I see the ark lying still beneath the snow, the moonlight glinting off its frozen hull. And in the wind a voice returns, "O mankind, Do not search for me in evidence. Seek me in silence. I open my eyes. The wind still moves. The files remain stamped and sealed. But I know the greatest curtain is not in any government archive, it is in the human heart. And when we dare to lift it, the light will enter, and we will see that the ark was never lost. It has been waiting all along for us to open our eyes. I have lived longer than I thought I would. The waters have receded, the trees have grown again, and the world wears a new face. Yet within me the sound of the old waves remains. Some nights, when the wind moves across the mountains, I hear the echo of the souls that drifted away. They do not accuse. They only ask one question. Do you remember? I look up at the sky and see the rainbow still hanging there, a band of light suspended between earth and heaven, tying the memory of mankind to the mercy of the Creator. I know it is the covenant, but a covenant only lives as long as man remembers. I have seen the world before the flood and after the flood. Both were beautiful, but one was filled with pride and the other with silence. Perhaps God loves silence, because only in silence can the soul hear him. I walk along a new river, its waters so clear I can see my reflection. In it, I see the eyes of both the one who defied and the one who was forgiven. They both live within me. I understand now that salvation is not a reward. It is a chance to begin again. This world does not need perfection. It needs humility. Someone once asked me if it was worth it when so few survived, when all that man had built was lost. I did not know, but I know this. If the waters had not come, mankind would have forgotten the meaning of breath. I think of Enoch, the one who was taken up, who saw the gates of light. Perhaps even now he stands within that brilliance, looking down, watching how we live with the gift of beginning again. I believe he still writes not on paper, but on time itself, each moment a line recording our faith or our forgetting. I wish I could tell him, there is still hope, though faint, because in every survivor, even in fear, there is the seed of mercy. I remember the first day I stepped off the ark. The ground was still wet, and the air smelled of salt. I knelt, touched the soil, and felt it tremble, as if the earth itself breathed again. I understood then creation had not died. It had changed form to live on. Perhaps the flood did not come to end the world, but to teach that everything can begin again, even when all seems lost. I taught my children to plant, to hunt, but first to pray. I told them, never think yourselves stronger than the wind, for one breath of heaven can undo a fortress. I do not know what the future will hold. I only know that mankind will forget again, and heaven will have to remind. Perhaps that too is part of the plan, that we learn, then forget, then learn again until we love truth more than ourselves. Sometimes I imagine that one day people will find the remains of the ark. They will measure, photograph, debate, publish, and perhaps they will not believe, but I do not need their belief. I only wish they would pause for a moment, stand still, and feel what I once felt, the smallness before grace. For whether they believe or not, the ark still lies there, needing no proof. It is not evidence, it is symbol. It reminds us that even when the world sinks, love still floats. When I close my eyes, I see the water, the wood, the rainbow, and I hear the old words again. The light was never lost, only forgotten. If you are hearing this, remember the ark was never just one vessel. Every soul is an ark. Every tear is a rain. Every act of forgiveness is a door out of the flood. Keep your heart soft, for the waters will come again, not as storms, but as the quiet tests of every day. And when the waters recede, what remains will not be wealth nor fame, but the compassion you carried through the waves. I have seen the world die and rise again, and I have learned judgment is not punishment. It is an invitation to return. The waters have done what they were sent to do. The rest is up to us.